For most of my life, people believed the same simple story about me, that I was just another high school math teacher who had spent decades grading papers, explaining algebra to teenagers, and living on a modest salary. To be fair, they weren't entirely wrong. I did spend 30 years teaching mathematics. I did spend countless evenings correcting homework and preparing lessons. And yes, teachers don't exactly become rich from their salaries. But what people never realized was that the story they believed about me was only half the truth. The other half? Well, I never told anyone. Not my coworkers, not my neighbors, not even most of my friends. Because sometimes the best way to understand people is to let them believe whatever they want about you. You learn a lot that way. For example, you learn how quickly people judge someone based on appearance. My car was always old, reliable, but old. My clothes were simple, comfortable, but never expensive. And my house? Just a small, quiet place in a normal neighborhood. Nothing that would ever suggest wealth. But behind that quiet life, I had been building something for 30 years. Something that started with a single decision, a decision I made during my very first year as a teacher. I still remember the day clearly. It was my first year teaching. I had just finished a long day explaining fractions to a classroom full of restless teenagers. When I arrived home, I sat at my small kitchen table and looked at my paycheck. It wasn't much. Enough to pay rent, enough for groceries, enough for basic living. But there wasn't much left after that. And I remember thinking something very important that night. If this is all I rely on, retirement could be very difficult. So I began reading. Books about money, books about investing, books about something most people ignore when they are young: time. One concept kept appearing again and again: compound interest. The idea that money could grow, slowly at first, but powerfully over time. Most people want quick results, but compound interest rewards patience. So I started small, very small. Every month, I took whatever money I could save and invested it. No fancy strategies, no risky bets, just simple investments. Index funds, broad market ETFs, companies that had existed for decades. Then I did something even more important. I left the money alone. Years passed. My life followed a simple routine. Wake up early, drive to school, teach mathematics, help students who struggled, celebrate the ones who finally understood something they thought they never could. I loved my job. But outside of work, something else was quietly happening. Every month, my investments grew. Not dramatically, not in exciting ways, but steadily, slowly, like a tree growing roots beneath the soil. Most people never saw it, because I never talked about it. While others upgraded their cars every few years, I kept mine. While others bought larger houses, I stayed where I was comfortable. The difference? I invested the extra money instead, year after year, decade after decade. And one day, something surprising happened. When I checked my portfolio balance one quiet evening, the number on the screen made me pause. My net worth had passed $7 million. I stared at the number for a long time, not because I felt rich, but because I felt free. Free to keep teaching, free to retire if I wanted, free to make choices based on happiness instead of money. But I made one more decision that night. I decided I would never tell anyone. And for many years, that secret stayed exactly where it belonged, hidden. Until the evening I met my son's future in-laws, an evening that would become very interesting. Some people might wonder why I never told anyone about my money. After all, many people love showing their success. Big houses, luxury cars, expensive vacations. But money has a strange effect on people. The moment others believe you are wealthy, the way they treat you begins to change. Some become overly respectful, others become jealous, and some suddenly become very interested in your life for reasons that have nothing to do with friendship. But when people believe you're ordinary, something interesting happens. They relax. They stop pretending. They show you exactly who they really are. And over the years, I realized that quiet anonymity was actually a gift. People spoke honestly around me. They made assumptions about my life. Sometimes those assumptions were amusing. Sometimes they were a little insulting. But I never corrected them, because I didn't need validation. I had something far more valuable than approval. I had freedom. And for many years, that freedom remained my private secret, until the day my son called me with news that would lead to one of the most memorable dinners of my life. It was a calm Sunday afternoon when my phone rang. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of tea, enjoying the quiet. When I saw Daniel's name on the screen, I smiled. My son had always been thoughtful, kind, hardworking, the kind of person who genuinely cared about others. But that afternoon, his voice sounded slightly nervous. "Mom," he said, "I want you to meet someone." That someone was Emily, his fiancée. The way he talked about her told me everything I needed to know. He was in love, and as a parent, that's all you really hope for. He told me Emily was intelligent, warm, and incredibly supportive. I was happy for him. But then he mentioned something else: Emily's parents. Apparently, they were very successful. Her father was a senior corporate lawyer at a major firm. Her mother was deeply involved in charity boards and high society events. And Emily thought it would be a good idea for both families to meet over dinner at a place called Harbor Crest Yacht Club. If you've never visited a yacht club before, it can be a fascinating experience. It's not just a restaurant. It's a place where wealth quietly gathers. Polished wood floors, crystal chandeliers, expensive suits, and conversations that often revolve around investments, business deals, and private schools. When Daniel told me the location, I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "Mom, you don't have to come if you'd feel uncomfortable." I laughed softly. After 30 years of teaching high school students during exam season, very little makes me uncomfortable. So, of course, I agreed. But as the day of the dinner approached, I made a small decision, a very deliberate one. I decided that when I arrived at that yacht club, I would look exactly the way everyone expected a simple teacher to look. Nothing more, nothing less. Sometimes the most interesting thing you can do in a room full of assumptions is let people keep making them. The evening of the dinner arrived quietly. I stood in front of my closet for a moment, looking at the clothes hanging inside. There were a few nicer outfits I could have worn, but instead I reached for something much simpler: an old gray cardigan. Comfortable shoes? Nothing flashy. Nothing that would impress anyone at a yacht club. And that was intentional, because I wanted to see something. I wanted to see how Emily's parents would treat someone they believed was just an ordinary school teacher. Sometimes people reveal their character not through what they say to powerful people, but through how they treat those they believe are beneath them. When I arrived at Harbor Crest Yacht Club, the building itself looked exactly as I expected. Large glass windows facing the water, soft golden lights reflecting off the harbor, expensive boats floating quietly in the distance. Inside, the room was full of polished tables, quiet music, and the gentle sound of expensive conversations. Emily greeted me at the entrance with a warm smile. She hugged me immediately, and in that moment I could tell something important. She was genuine, kind, the kind of person my son deserved. But when her parents approached, their reaction was very different. Emily's father shook my hand politely, but his eyes moved quickly, taking in the cardigan, the shoes, the simple purse. People who spend their lives around wealth often learn to measure others very quickly. And in that moment, I could almost see the calculation happening in his mind. Teacher, modest income, ordinary life. His smile remained polite, but there was something else behind it, something slightly dismissive. Emily's mother was similar. She was polite but distant, as if she had already placed me into a category. Dinner began smoothly enough. The waiter poured wine, menus were opened, and for a few minutes the conversation stayed comfortably neutral. But eventually, the topic shifted, and it shifted exactly where I expected it would. Money. Emily's father seemed very comfortable discussing finance. In fact, it quickly became his favorite subject. He talked about investment strategies, market movements, net worth benchmarks. At one point, he began discussing the importance of building wealth early. He spoke with the confidence of someone used to giving financial advice. Then he said something that made the table slightly quieter. "It's unfortunate," he said casually, "that some professions simply don't prepare people financially." He paused for a moment, then looked directly at me. Teachers, for example. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair. Emily looked embarrassed, but her father continued talking as if nothing unusual had happened. He explained how many educators reach retirement age with very little savings, and how important it was for professionals like him to help others understand modern investing. Then he leaned back slightly and smiled. "I'd be happy to help you sometime," he said. The table became very quiet. But I simply smiled, because the moment he believed he was teaching me something was the exact moment the evening became interesting. I took a sip of water, keeping my expression calm and polite. Emily's father continued to talk about investing, unaware that I was listening, and planning my own little lesson. He was confident, charming even, in his own way. But overconfidence can be dangerous, because sometimes people forget that knowledge isn't everything, and appearances can be deceiving. I smiled softly and nodded. "Yes, I appreciate the offer," I said casually. Although, I paused, letting my words hang for just a moment. Although I actually just closed a $2.1 million position last week in a fund your firm advises. The table went completely silent. I could see it immediately. Emily's father froze. His smile vanished. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what he had just heard. Daniel's jaw dropped. Emily's hand instinctively reached for mine, wide-eyed. I calmly reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened my brokerage account. Then I turned the screen toward him. My name, 7-figure balance, the exact fund his firm managed. His wine glass nearly slipped from his hand. I looked him squarely in the eye. "I teach because I love it," I said gently, letting each word land carefully. "Not because I have to." Then I added one final line. "But I do understand compound interest, and disrespect doesn't compound very well." There was a pause, the kind of pause where people realize the world is bigger than they thought. Dinner ended early that night, not with drama, not with shouting, but quietly. A subtle shift had occurred. My son didn't need to explain me anymore. Emily's parents would never underestimate me again. After that evening, something subtle but unmistakable changed. Emily's parents no longer tried to categorize me. Their polite questions continued at future gatherings, but they had lost the condescending edge. Every invitation I received afterward was formal, respectful, measured, and I never had to mention money again. The secret I had kept for 30 years had revealed itself in the perfect moment, not with arrogance, not with a show of wealth, just quietly, with truth and calm confidence. Daniel, my son, learned an important lesson that night too. He saw that respect isn't demanded, it isn't bought, it is quietly earned over decades of patience, consistency, and knowing your own worth. Now, when he introduces me to people, he never feels the need to explain my career or my finances. He simply says, "This is my mom." And that is all anyone needs to know. Because sometimes, the most valuable things in life are not the things people can see. Over the years, I continued teaching. I continued to invest. But the story I tell my students is the same. Do what you love. Be patient. Make smart choices quietly. Respect yourself and others. Because compound interest works for money, and it works for life. And just like that, the life I had built in silence became my greatest advantage. A life full of freedom, dignity, and patience, worth far more than any number on a screen.